later. This panel will curate reflections on a range of legal and judicial approaches addressing the growing challenge of climate change in a variety of geographical settings. I'm going to pause for just a few seconds until we've all sorted out the...
ये इसके साथ ब्लूटूथ कनेक्टेड है। आई डोंट नो, सुबह से बात कर रहा है, अभी इसको क्या हुआ है, आई डोंट नो।
ये हिल रही है, कार
Let me try again. This panel will curate reflections on a range of legal and judicial approaches addressing the growing challenge of climate change in a variety of geographical settings. I think technology is now cooperating, so yay. While Pakistan is widely known to be among the countries most vulnerable to the effects of climate change, it is also the site of a robust tradition of judicial intervention in environmental questions. Indeed, across national settings, courts have emerged as key arenas for environmental and climate justice, balancing environmental imperatives with socio-economic ones, and development needs with safeguarding human rights. We have on this panel today some of the very people who have crafted judicial pathways to environmental governance across a range of jurisdictional locations. I'm extremely honored and excited to be in conversation with you all. A very warm welcome to each one of you. Super brief introductions before we begin the conversation. Senator Sherry Rahman is a fourth-term parliamentarian and the first female opposition leader in the Senate of Pakistan. She serves as the chair of the Senate Standing Committee on Climate Change and was previously the Federal Minister for Climate Change. At COP27, credited with the decision to establish a loss and damage fund, Senator Rahman served as the G77 chair. Professor Luis Gabriel Franceschi is the Assistant Secretary General of the Commonwealth of Nations and the Conference Secretary for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. He is also the founding dean of Strathmore University Law School in Nairobi. In addition to his legal writing, he has drafted key treaties such as the UN Nairobi Declaration. Justice Sapna Pradhan Mala is a senior CUNY judge of the Supreme Court of Nepal. She has delivered path-breaking judgments on women's property rights, domestic violence, the decriminalization of abortion, and the protection of confidentiality in accessing the mechanisms of the justice system. She has also served as a member of the UN Committee Against Torture, as well as of Nepal's first Constituent Assembly. Justice Luc Lavresen is the President of the Constitutional Court of Belgium. He is also the President of the European Forum of Judges for the Environment. As well, he contributes his expertise in environmental matters to organizations such as the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law and the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment. He has also served as faculty in environmental law at Ghent University. Justice Jawad Hassan is a judge of the Lahore High Court. His landmark judgments include those on constitutional questions, commercial and taxation issues, mediation and climate change and its human rights implications. Among his numerous initiatives are training programs for judges of commercial courts. Justice Antonio Herman Benjamin is a justice of the National High Court of Brazil. He has also served as Assistant Attorney General of the state of São Paulo, where he headed the Environmental Protection Department. He is a founding president of the Brazilian Consumer Law and Policy Institute and of the Law for a Green Planet Institute, a member of the UN Secretary General Legal Experts Group on Crimes Against the Environment, and of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law. Justice Syed Mansoor Ali Shah is a senior CUNY judge of the Supreme Court of Pakistan. His numerous and path-breaking judgments cover environmental sustainability, environmental and climate justice, and human rights. Justice Shah is also a judicial member of the Global Judicial Institute on Environment in Brazil. And as chair of this panel, I thank him on behalf of all of us for conceptualizing this discussion. I will call on each speaker to share their reflections and experiences with us. I request that your comments take up to 10 minutes each. Justice Shah has extra time at the end as the chair of the panel. So this is just to assure you all that I'm not biased. I will request him to synthesize the panel discussion for us at the end. So without further ado, and in light of multiple and overlapping time commitments for some of you, let me begin with you, Senator Rahman. I also want to acknowledge that one challenge is going to be, it's just going to be very easy for the panelists to ignore me because I'm standing to a side. But rest assured, you all have 10 minutes each. Senator Rahman, recently your efforts have been focused on global North-South relations vis-a-vis climate finance. What do you think the international experience of negotiating loss and damage offers at the national level in terms of the legal and judicial space? The floor is yours.
Thank you. You're a real Nazi, I can tell.
I'm trying.
Bismillah Rahman Rahim. I hope some of my voice is projecting beyond the slow mic we have. Anyhow, without wasting time, first of all, I'd like to thank the organizer, the Secretary Law, for doing this, and Honorable Justice Mansoor Ali Shah, Honorable Justice Aisha Malik in the audience, Honorable Justice Antonio Harme Benjamin, Honorable Professor Luis Gabriel Franceschi, Honorable Justice Luke Dornberg Lawson, and Honorable Justice Sapana Malla, and last but not least, Honorable Justice Jawad Hussain, who's been a leading light in landmark judgments, especially against the kind of smog that has, historic smog that has enveloped Lahore in Pakistan. It is right now the most polluted city in the world. It is not something to be proud of, but it requires intervention. So without much ado, I'm going to now just speak a little bit about what I understand to be the climate crisis. There is a climate crisis, ladies and gentlemen, which is ostensibly why we are at the 29th Conference of Parties. At the 29th Conference of Parties, and we are doing this because the word crisis, and what are its links to judgments and decisions? The word crisis comes from the Greek word kris. Kris means judgment and decision. So it is time for all of humanity, for all actors with power, to take the decisions that are needed at this 29th Conference of Parties. To my mind, ladies and gentlemen and honorable judges, this is an opportunity, at least that the vulnerable countries of the world cannot afford to miss. We come together for multilateralism and multilateral tables so that we get justice. At the heart of our negotiations lies the core value of climate justice. Pakistan is less than a 1% emitter, like many countries in the world, like Africa, like the small island states, who are under an accelerated impact of climate change and are going through existential levels of crisis that we don't hear about. Now, in colder climates, the mood is different. What we have here today is COP 29th time we're meeting. Actually 30th, the first one triggered this. After 30 Conference of Parties, where are we? Quick summary. The emissions are going up that we have all pledged to reduce, which means the global warming is going up that we have all pledged and promised to reduce. It also tells us an unfortunate fact that is quite heartbreaking to those of us who have fought very hard for climate justice. The instrument and tool that will unlock change and justice for people of the global south and anywhere vulnerability comes to the forefront is climate financing. At this COP, I'm not happy to report that we are still at a very low figure. The gap of emissions, the gap of global warming continues, and the gap in financing is even bigger. We pledge, we hear promises that this will change. Well, the $100 billion that was promised annually has barely materialized to 160 annually. Now this time, the headline must be, from this COP, the headline must be that the Global South is already in a place where $4 trillion are needed, $4 trillion annually. The money, ladies and gentlemen, is very much in the system. It's not unavailable. But what do we want to see? We want to see the billions going up from trillions, and we want an accounting. We want an accounting and auditing, a monitoring of these finances that disappear in small rivers of operational ODA. They often become overseas development assistance. What does that mean? That the climate financing is doubling as regular financing. So the countries, the developed nations that have been the historic emitters, now have to decide, do they want to scale up the financing? Do they want to give us the speed, scale, and agility we need to unlock all this? Because my question is, why is it still locked? At the 30th conference, the financing remains a paltry sum compared to the level of suffering that the Global South is experiencing, particularly my country. And at this visit, the Prime Minister of my country, Mia Shahbaz Sharif, proposed to match the NDC's nationally determined contributions. We all contribute the scaling down of emissions. This time we have proposed internationally determined contributions for financing to be tracked, monitored, reviewed, and understood. So everybody is very clear where this money is going, because we are told it's there. It is not reaching the front lines of climate vulnerability and fragility. Lastly, I would like to say very much that while the world is going through great transitions, one of them is the return of conflict to the world after the Second World War. We have more conflicts today than we have ever seen in this century, which cannot afford them. It needs people sitting together, it needs people building common ground, not spending money and technology on destruction. Frankly, we are at a place where the scale and fury and barbarity of some of the conflict is so great that we forget to even say that these conflicts are leaving the earth completely scorched and burnt. So the scale of climate destruction that the wars are bringing also requires your attention, honorable justices. And at an international level, who is adjudicating the loss of soil, the loss of biodiversity, the loss of water? Just one day in Gaza, 120 days of the bombing in Gaza has been the same kind of emission you see in a coal-fired plant. Coal emission is one of the dirtiest. And no one is talking about the kind of climate distress that is being brought to the world through the escalation of conflict. So what do we need to do? We need to scale up our efforts. We need to amplify our voices for climate justice and not be distracted by technical conversations that take you into, let's go into the private sector. Yes, the private sector is an engine of growth. We will never walk away from that. In my country, it is powering a solar revolution quietly. 15 gigawatts of solar panels were imported last year just from China. That in itself is 1/3 of your installed capacity. Moderator is a Nazi here. Good for you. And so I have 2 minutes, and we need to scale that up. We need to understand that countries are struggling along on their own in one of the world's and humanity's most existential crises, which impacts every path of life. It impacts human health. People have to breathe. through smog. It impacts your how you grow your food, and it impacts water. Water is life. The scarcity that we are experiencing already, you have not heard of it. By 2025, Pakistan is water scarce. It's scheduled to be water scarce. That is already happening in parts of the country. We are not waiting for 2025. So, the impacts on human survival, on food systems, on water availability, in very simple lay words, are existential. We need to be very clear what we are fighting for. We are fighting for the right not just of the future generations to live in these spaces, but for ourselves as well. Because for most of us, many of us on the front lines of disaster, climate disaster, the risk and the volatility is too high to manage. And we now have a place in the sun where 1/3 of Pakistan was inundated 2 years ago. 1/3. We are still recovering from it. I hope there's a good session tomorrow on how we are using carbon financing to move forward. But make no mistake, it is no substitute for public international financing, which must be mobilized. Neither is the private sector, neither is, all can come in. But there can be no walking away from the responsibility to mobilize through multinational development banks, MDBs, what you will. They need to be capitalized, and that promise for the trillions has to be the headline of this COP. I'm sure it will be, but it must be in public international financing, not telling us to go find de-risked money in the private sector. My honorable judges, I must not take more of your time. I'm terrified of this wonderful moderator, and I will take your leave now and hope that I can sit through some of your sessions because I have a flight to Muscat for another conference. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Rahman. I think I'm doing my job pretty okay, if this is the feeling and that I'm inspiring. Our next speaker is Professor Franceschi, and my question to you is, given your long involvement in the international environmental sphere, what do you consider to be the key legal challenges and limits, as well as contributions to climate justice and governance more generally? If you're more comfortable sitting there, you should continue to do so. If you want to come here, you're welcome to. There is a mic.
Exactly.
You can see it here.
आप आएंगे लगा दो यार इसको दोबारा
7 billion people, 60% under the age of 30, doing beautiful collaboration and cooperation between countries. The idea is, if someone finds a solution, we all go for it. We don't spend the same penny twice. And very interestingly, if I have the copyright, you have the right to copy. We are all countries which are very much together, united by a past that may be more or less painful, but we have similar institutions, similar language, and we are in the business of finding solutions. So when we think of the environment and the question the moderator has very eloquently posed to me, I want to take ourselves a little bit first away from the law, more into philosophy, because legal realists first look at reality and then build the law from there. And I think we have been having this conversation for more than 50 years now. In 1992 and 93, when I was, and 94, when I was beginning my professional career in UNEP in Kenya, these conversations were already going on. And you say fast forward 30 years, what has happened? why are we still talking about the same topics? Profit maximization. I think it's the first obstacle to moving forward. We are trying to make profit out of a climate crisis. It's like we were trying to make profit out of debt. And we had those packages, the ninja packages, before the crash in 2008. Well, there are absurdities we have to be aware of. And we lawyers and judges have to be very mindful of those absurdities. There are people here in this COP who are trying to make profit out of the environmental crisis. Rightfully or wrongfully, but this happens. And we have to be very much aware of this. Then, of course, when we combine these absurdities also with impressions and perceptions that have been created, the CEO of AstraZeneca told us in a conference in Sharm el Sheikh, we were having a conversation, and he said, do you know, Louis, that the emissions of the pharma industry and health industry are more than the emissions of the whole of Africa plus the airline industry combined? Say, wow. And here we are trying to impose taxes on the airline industry and blaming them for the mess, when the absurdity is that we are trying to kill ourselves, destroying the climate, to remain healthy and live longer. And they say, well, there is something here that has not really merged. The third absurdity I want to bring up is the one of seats, small island developing states. All the seats, the 33 seats combined in the world, they amount to less than 1% of the emissions. So we say, well, these seats are the ones suffering the greatest impact of climate change, the hurricanes, the incredible cyclones they have to bear, droughts, flooding, is one thing after the other, much more common than they used to be in the past. And we do nothing for them. We actually isolate them more and more with an unfair carbon credit system. So if we put all the energy we put into COVID 3 years ago, and we do it into the climate change problem, we will resolve it. I mean, human genius got us into this mess. Human genius has to get out of this mess, as the Secretary General Patricia Scotland always reminds us. Well, we did it for COVID. It's amazing how the world got paralyzed. Everybody agreed to remain home for a while. It was not normal, it's not ideal, but certainly we are making decisions here when the climate crisis is so much in front of us, which seem to be pointing at an idea that we still have many years to go. I want to mention one recent decision which we are all aware of, and it's the Shell appeal decision, which reverted the obligation of Shell as a company to reduce their emissions by 45%. I was surprised that the CEO of Shell said this is a decision which is good for the world, for the Netherlands, and for us, for Shell. I say, well, first of all, Shell is not a Dutch company, it's a British company. And the largest corporate shareholder is BlackRock, which also owns Lockheed Martin, all the weapons in the world. So there are many things that we have to ask ourselves, even as corporates. I don't want to point at any specific company here, it's not my job. Actually, it could get me out of my job, but but somehow these are accusations that have been flying to and fro. And you say, well, hey, big corporates, can you do something and stop this agency relationship that makes the shareholder price be the determining factor of success and failure at the expense of the environment and many other things? Certainly that decision perhaps had some sense, because it told the lower courts you cannot give a specific percentage, or 45%. What will you tell other companies? 43, 46, etc. Perhaps the court overreach, but that goes into principles and foundations of the decision which we don't have time to discuss. The fact is that it recognizes there is a link between human rights and climate, and there is a link also with the duty of care. So I believe we all, judges, professors, lawyers, practitioners, have to exploit that duty of care, and the key to success perhaps is there. The other thing that is also an absurdity is the carbon credit. If you go to carboncredits.com now, you see the carbon credits price live. And if you look at the compliance markets and the voluntary markets, and especially the nature-based carbon, the difference is so unbelievable. I mean, it's from 60 pounds to 0.2 pounds. And many times corporates, banks go into developing countries, and they will assess your carbon emissions or carbon sequestration, and they give you loans pegged to that very ridiculous amount of 0.2. They say, well, this has to be addressed. This cannot continue the same. And of course, we come up with mechanisms like the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which seems to be a clever idea, but it actually makes it more difficult for small states to be at par. So we have created here a situation that is very much like the football or the soccer world, where you have Liverpool as the best team in the world, clearly, or Manchester United as the worst, and Real Madrid and Barca and the big teams league that no small team can compete with them and can never catch up. So you are actually making countries remain poor and making countries remain rich. And the rich are the one polluting and offsetting their pollution at the expenses of the poor, who remain poor and cannot develop. So that's a very, I'm being brutally perhaps sincere here, but there are solutions, and we are in the business of finding solutions. So I think we as lawyers, judges, practitioners, professors of law need to find those solutions in the law, looking at the philosophy of the origin of the problem and finding those solutions. Australia and Bolivia found a solution which is very interesting for their rivers. Their rivers have legal personality. So when you pollute a river in Bolivia or in Australia, you are causing damage to a legal personality, a legal person. So maybe that's one of the solutions. And we have to keep on searching for those solutions that will give us the affordable green energy transition, which is the core at the dilemma we are living today. We cannot guarantee success, but we guarantee failure by giving up. That's not a choice. Thank you. This is my time.
Thank you, Professor Franceschi. Our next speaker is Justice Mala. My question for you, or my prompt to you, is what is the landscape of environmental jurisprudence like in Nepal, another site of robust developments in the environmental arena? Are there trends in litigation that you have observed? What other jurisdictions are Nepalese courts in conversation with? And what do you foresee the court's role to be as the effects of climate change worsen? We'd love your thoughts on any of this.
Chair of the session, delegates, all the present here. Talking about litigation, in recent years with the development projects, with the increased consciousness among the people on climate crisis, the influx of PIL and environmental justice issues has been increasing. Yes, it has been the PIL has become instrumental to correct the gaps or to recognize violation, also to recognize the rights, expanding existing laws creatively to ensure remedies. rights are interdependent and rights are interrelated. Even in the absence of explicit laws in many South Asian countries, at least I can talk about, right to life has been expanded as a right to live in a healthy and clean environment. So, but the language of the law and language of the constitution matters because it can create accountability. Coming from Nepal, with the enactment of new constitution, we are able to shift paradigm from being judicial activism to constitutional activism. So we already have certain international framework like Stockholm Framework, Rio Declaration, which are not only historical on defining international law, but it has also been able to make the law and shape the jurisprudence. As a result, different principles have been emerged. I will not take all the names. Polluters pay, dubio pro natura. These principles has become instrumental in shaping different judgments, and sustainable development goal has become even more monitoring indicator for the state parties. So now we have in Nepal we have of course new laws that has created positive obligation on government to bring due diligence. But then in what court has been doing, they have been first widening the locus standi or scope of justiciability, and judiciary has been applying not only international convention but different principles that has emerged in environmental injustice. But then how it has been working, I just want to highlight with one judgment, because we are taking different approach in different nature of cases that is coming to us. But one of the challenge what we have been seeing is implementation of those judgment. Implementation of laws are also a challenge. And then sometimes what we think we have made the judgment, and making judgment if the responsibility of the court is over, sometimes we question ourselves, and therefore we have taken a different approach. One is putting those kind of environmental injustice issue under the continuous mandamus. And then I want to share with one of the case which also links with Pakistan situation. It's a Everest waste management case which has been decided recently. In this case, the question was how to manage the waste deposited by climbers and the dead body of climbers left in Himalayan region. It was, of course, put on the continuous hearing, and we used a different approach in this case because I want to share. Sometimes we also need to have a look for the creative solutions, and how we did in this case. First, because when you deal with the case, it's very important that you learn the nature of waste deposited in Himalayas. And most polluted Himalaya in Nepal is Everest, because most of the climbers, they love to climb in Himalaya region. And we also try to look during the continuous mandamus process where it is deposited, because if it is deposited in first base camp, second base camp, or third base camp, depending on that, we have to see how it can be brought back. And based on those information, which was provided by the guide, by the climbers or local groups who have been working in those areas, including Nepal Army. We wanted to educate ourselves because we also needed to learn the nature of Himalayas to give the justice, because we realized during that time the Nepal Army went for bringing somebody, and due to avalanche, two Sherpas who climbed with them, they passed away. So ultimately, instead of bringing the old body, they had to come back with their own friend's body. So in this case, what we also did is, on continuous mandamus process, we asked the government to come up with a plan. and they came with a plan. And when even we asked them to make a plan, we said you have to take two approaches. One is for those bodies or those waste which is already exists there, you have to have a different plan. And then secondly, you also have to make a plan that is to take a precaution measure so that we can prevent further harm in those areas. So they came up with their own ideas, and we also try to identify different government agencies who came together, because even only in Sagarmatha there are 300 bodies, and to bring one body it costs $20,000 to bring one body. So in this case, I want to quote one paragraph from the case. It is said that the accumulated waste and dead bodies in the mountains telling some story. Mountains are saying there's a limit of my capacity. Acts that exceeds this limit pierce my heart. The waste left by climbers and the bodies of those who died in expeditions have shattered my spirit. I am in unbearable condition. Rapid melting is changing my appearance, and I am turning into a dark rock. If this process continues, an even more painful situation will arise. We cannot watch this happen. To safeguard our mountain ranges, which are listed as World Heritage Sites, protect the rights and livelihood of Himalayas, of people, uphold the pride of Nepal, and ensure Nepalese economic development, it is imperative that state bodies immediately assume the role of trustee. And in this case, we also recommend directed to prohibit the use of helicopters in those areas except for the rescue purpose. So in this case, court says it is not just our right to access nature. Nature itself has a inherent rights, dubio pro natura, that must be respected. We must preserve nature's dignity and ensure its right understanding and the limitation, and also directed to initiate necessary steps to file for a loss and damage claim under the Paris Agreement for the compensation for the damage caused, but also recommended to collect and produce the evidences of harm and claim for the compensation. Yes, we have been trying to be a creative, bringing creative solution. Out of 10 highest mountains of the world, Nepal has 9 highest and Pakistan has second highest Himalayas. In claiming the loss and damage fund, we are not only vulnerable and victim. What we have mentioned in that case is that we also have a strength. The strength is Himalaya glacier has a strength to mitigate the global warming of the world. So we have a right on loss and damage fund. Let's also negotiate with our strength. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Mala. Our next speaker is Justice Lavrisan. The European judicial and legal spheres have also been vibrant arenas for climate-related jurisprudence. Can you share reflections on why and how the courts emerged as such important sites, which jurisdictions are in conversation and furnish precedent for others, and what is currently unfolding? Thank you.
So, thank you very much. I will give you a European perspective on climate litigation. And to start with, I should say that climate litigation in Europe is not new. It started in the 90s, but at that time, let's say this litigation was rather technical issues. It was discussions about emission trading, about support schemes for renewable energy. Sometimes permits for big projects with an impact on climate were challenged, and so on. What's changed with around the time, and probably also due to the Paris Agreement, which is a bottom-up approach, where national determined contributions must be presented and updated and so on. And that brings the national judges into the picture, because if people find that countries are not living up to their commitments, then they will challenge this before national national courts. And so more strategic cases where the overall ambitions of states but also of companies are at stake have been brought to the courts. Of course, the first one was the Urgenda case in the Netherlands, with a final decision of the Supreme Court of the Netherlands in 2019, saying that the combination of the civil duty of care combined with human rights, Article 2 and 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, means that states must protect their citizens against climate change and must live up to their commitments and let's say bring net zero in reality towards the mid of this century. And so the court said, Netherlands, you have to do more, you have to increase your emission reduction objective with 5% towards the end of 2020. And similar cases, sometimes based on other legal arguments, have been brought in Ireland. You have the case of Friends of the Irish Environment in France, the Grand Descente case, and the case Notre Affaire à tous. In Germany, the Neubauer case. In Belgium, Klimaatzaak, where we had last year a decision of the Court of Appeal saying Belgium has to do more and increase their reduction, its reduction ambition towards 55% towards 2030. And then we had also the first case, again in the Netherlands, the case of Milieudefensie against Shell. It was already mentioned, where the court in first instances decided that Shell had to reduce its emissions, Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3, with the first one with 45% and the Scope 3 emissions do a best effort to reduce it with 45%. As you know, this decision has been reformed earlier this week by the Court of Appeal. But I think this is a very important judgment, because the Court of Appeal recognizes that also carbon measures have a duty to care, and that human rights have a horizontal effects, and the combinations of both brought the Court of Appeal to the conclusion that carbon measures must, towards the midst of this century, realize net zero emissions. So that's very important. As was mentioned, the order which has the court of first instance has given has been dropped, but there have been very good reasons. As the so-called Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions are concerned, the Court of Appeal came to the conclusion that meanwhile Shell has adopted a new policy in which they commit to do that towards the mid of this century, and also the first experience was that till now Shell was living up to that commitment. So under Dutch law it was impossible to give an order of the kind which was given. Then it must be very evidently that the duty of care would be violated, which could not be proved in this case. And for the Scope 3 emissions, these are the emissions of the products, the oil, salt and used by the clients of Shell. The Court of Appeal came to the conclusion that meanwhile there is new European Union legislation, the ETS2 system, which is regulating that. And secondly, the court said Shell is working with oil and gas. If we reduce, we give an order to reduce emissions from that, then there is a highly risk that others companies will produce the energy on the basis of coal, and then we are farther away from home that we are now. So I think you have to see this judgment in this right perspective. What was important for Europe, of course, was to know what would the European Court of Human Rights think about this human rights approach from the Dutch court, the Belgian court. And the answer of that court came earlier this year, in April of this year, where the European Court of Human Rights, in 3 Grand Chamber judgments, nearly unanimously, there was only one dissenting, came indeed to the conclusion that there is a positive obligation under Article 8 and probably also under Article 2 of the European Convention of Human Rights for states to reduce their emissions, and the court is following the same approach as what we see in the COPs and what we see in Urgenda. This should be realized towards net zero, towards the mid of this century. But the court is going much further, saying you must make a policy and you must update it, and you must work with carbon budgets and so on in the Clima Signorina case. So that's a very important judgment on the principle that human rights are imposing positive obligations to, let's say, serious tackle the problems. But it's also very important on the question of standing. So you must know that normally you must have victim. You must be a victim of a human rights violation, and here the court accepted that NGOs, in this case it was a Swiss NGO, has standing in this issue before the court to challenge the overall climate ambitions, in this case of Switzerland. What's also important in that judgment, you must know, the European Court of Human Rights is an international court, has a subsidiary role to play. So you can only go to the Strasbourg court when you have exhausted national remedies, and when you can prove you are a victim of a human rights violation. So these two reasons, these were the reasons why 2 of the 3 cases were dropped. But the European Court of Human Rights is giving a very clear signal to national judges, because Switzerland has also been condemned for a violation of Article 6 of the European Convention, because the national courts was not accepting these cases and was not seriously looking to these cases, and in different parts of the judgment the European Court of Human Rights is stressing the need for national judiciaries to take these cases seriously. So these are the strategic cases. I think at the same time these more technical cases are going further, and we see also a new type of cases which is in the media again these days. We have seen it 2-3 years ago in Belgium, in Germany with the floods at that moment. That cases are coming because people found that the authorities are not alerting people sufficiently early of possible floodings, etc. And the same case is going around now in Spain, the floods of 2 weeks ago, but also the floods of this week again in Spain, but also in Italy. Also, there the liability of authorities, that are cases which are coming also to our courts. So I think probably we are just at the beginning of climate litigation, and that it will, except when we find here this week the Holy Grail and we solve all the problems, but I doubt that that will be the case. So I think for many decades to come, judges not only in Europe but all around the world will be confronted with climate cases from different types. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Lavris. And can I now call on Justice Hassan? How would you characterize the role of courts in the environmental sphere? What are promising signs? What are worrying ones? What sorts of international exchanges do you think are important and that there should be more of from the vantage of Pakistan's courts?
Good morning, everyone. I'll just give a 2 minutes prelude to what I wanted to say on climate finance, and want to share some good news with what Pakistan has done since last COP28 and now in COP29. Last year, when we came to COP28 in Dubai with Justice Shah, we were the only judges who spoke at COP, and my focus was on climate finance law, which was very needed, and Pakistan became a party to Loss and Damage Fund Board. Now this year, we are a panel with Justice Aisha Malik, the first judge in the Supreme Court of Pakistan, with us, who will speak later on. I'll share some good news before I go into the legal framework of climate finance in Pakistan and what the government has done in the last 1 year and to geared up for receiving the grants. As you know, the Prime Minister of Pakistan spoke 2 days ago, the Finance Minister of Pakistan, the Deputy Finance Minister of Pakistan, and their focus was totally on climate finance. The purpose, what we wanted to speak here today, and before I speak on that, I'll share you a famous case which I was doing in Pakistan, all over the world, talking about a girl called Amal. Not Amaluddin or Amal Kalouni from Lebanon. Her name is Amal, a 3-year-old young girl, Amal Sukhera. Parents stopped her to go to school. Parents stopped her not to have a birthday on the ground. Parents stopped her not to go to any parties. Parents stopped her not to go out of the house because we are in the most polluted city in the world, that's Lahore. It is one of the highest smog level which nobody can even think of. And that story, she came to the court. And what I wanted to speak is that we look at the world jurisprudence. Pakistan has the unique features in the world where we'll always see the soft law by the Western world, by the UN, and we bring it to the Pakistani constitution, to the judgments in the country. We also look at the jurisprudence of the global world, and what I had to see whether a 3-year-old girl can bring a case to Pakistani courts, because child is defined under the constitution as a fundamental right to free education, which above 5. She is not a citizen because she has to be 18. She's not an individual because she's not a person. She's not a person that she is a person to be a person in Pakistan. She's just a 3-year-old child, a toddler. So what I need to focus was that constitutional courts can look into a word called a party, and we then look at the Philippine judgment of just Antonio Pasa case with the Philippine Supreme Court declared the doctrine of intergenerational right, that it's my generation and generation yet to born, and who will speak about us. Amal came to my court and said, What Lahore have you given me? As a 3-year-old, I'm not going to school. As a 3-year-old, I'm on my laptop. I can't even go and play. Every child needs to play. That case, we're looking into interpretation of article. But the good news I want to share with the story is Pakistan in the last 2 COPs has brought, Justice Sherry Rahman just mentioned, Article 9A. It took us 51 years of our constitution to bring to a right to a healthy environment, right to a sustainable environment in our constitution. It took us 30 years of Pakistan to bring the Shella Zia Wabda judgment, where Pakistan judiciary has led the world on environmental protection, environmental conservation, climate justice, climate finance, and now climate mitigation, climate adaptation on one word of Article 9, which the Supreme Court in Shella Zia and interpreted that right to life means right to a healthy environment. But we don't need to do now. We have a right to 9A, right to environmental sustainable development. And sustainable is word used in the law which talks about to meet the future generation without compromising the younger generation or the present generation. So here what we need to do is that Pakistan is looking into, but the world examines our judiciary. Why? Only for 2 reasons. We innovate. We are pioneers in the world bringing the environmental commissions dealing with the scientific issue, just as Asha will speak later. We are pioneer in the world by having the committees. We bring out the grey gaps in the constitution, grey gaps in the law by asking the government and experts to sit with us. And we have done so far, like I came to right people with disability, we brought a law with the government sat down. It's an issue of a social justice. We brought a concept with the girl Sana Khurshid came to. We brought an issue on food security. Ahmed Pansota case, which is now taught at Harvard Law School, where we're speaking on this issue, that where there is a food security now of climate justice, you need to make some kind of regulations. And our government is very good. Government doesn't say no. It sits down with the activists, it sits down with the academics, and they start preparing laws. And so many laws coming from Pakistan. A climate change authority was made by Justice Shah's first judgment, and the first judgment in the world coming out in the climate mitigation, climate issue of climate justice, Asghar Laghari case, which is the most cited, most referred case in the world. So what is Pakistan's issue on climate finance and climate framework on climate finance? A, that Pakistan is suffering the worst, as 8.2 million people were affected by the floods. We are very lucky that we are looking into. What I wanted to show is that Pakistani judiciary has given all judgments, and this is a packet we are leaving at the COP desk. This is also a link. They're all online. We had a conference and where we all compiled the Pakistan Supreme Court and High Court judgment only in the last 2 years, focusing on climate justice, climate finance, mitigation, adaptation. This is the packet I leave for you all. And something which I spoke last time before I go into framework was something we called about whether Pakistan has a climate finance law. Can Pakistan is capable of handling climate finance in the grant of GS, GEF, GCF, multi-donor banks, a grant or somewhere a local financing. I gave this paper, it's published here. I'm leaving it for you here. Before I go and dig into the real topic today is the climate finance law. The first framework of Pakistan is very much capable of handling climate finances from any kind of source, whether it's GS, GCF, GEF, multinational banks, Paris Club, Madrid Club, or any multi or big North global country. We have 5 frameworks now. First and the most important framework for Pakistan is the constitutional framework. The constitutional framework is that we just came and drafted, Avais is sitting with us, we had just drafted a bill for sin, the recognition of Carbon Credit Act, where in the preamble we are mentioning that Pakistan constitution recognizes the sustainable environment as a right. Pakistan superior courts and Supreme Court recognizes and protects that right. Right is an interest recognized and protected by rule of legal justice, the first principle. And whereas we start that Pakistan constitution has one very big word that after Article 9A is fourth schedule of the constitution, which says Pakistan government can look into any international law for implementing of its provision, like the Paris Club, like the UNFCCC or other Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement. Second framework is statutory framework. In the Pakistani Environmental Act, this section 31 says that all international agreements which are mentioned in the schedule, including UNFCCC, the Paris Agreement, is government can make directly a rule to implement the provisions of that. Third category is the regulatory framework. The Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan is the board where we have issued the green guidelines for companies, and that green guidelines are issued under the section 20 of the Securities and Exchange Act. So it's the regulator for the companies and banks and insurance companies which can regulate. Again, the State Bank of Pakistan also has the direction which is issued for green financing. Financing can be solar financing, financing can be given to some project for mitigation or adaptation. They can do it under section 41 of the Banking Companies Act, Ordinance 1962. So you have a regulatory framework, constitution. Now the part is the judiciary, and the most important in the last 2 minutes I have is to give the confidence to the investor investing in Pakistan. Most important topic which I don't have time to speak on is the symbiotic relationship of the climate finance, international commercial arbitrations, and also the commercial courts. The most importantly is what is happening in Ecuador case. Arbitration is coming out now. There are a lot of issues where the finance given to some country, an issue of climate issue came out, and the issue was dispute arose, went to the international forums like the ICC, London Court of Arbitration, and cases coming out of those. And how can we deal with this? That international commercial arbitration, Pakistan is geared up. Justice Shah just have the draft of the new Arbitration Act. Pakistan is a signatory to the New York Convention 1958. We have judges sitting here who's given a judgment, and we, including myself, a concept of doctrine of pro-enforcement bias in the foreign awards, where we have to, if in any award coming to Pakistan from anywhere, we have the New York Convention judges, and we also have the commercial courts. And now the issue, lastly, one word, that commercial courts and the environmental courts are being trained, because the climate finance also talks about the capacity building. Climate finance also talks about the technical support. We have the technical support of donors with Pakistan. We are geared up, and we are all very much prepared to receive the international grant. We are very much prepared to have a regulatory framework, and the courts are all here. When you look at the Pakistani judgments, and somebody at the last says, is my financing secured in Pakistan? The answer by all of you can be, yes, it is. The courts are aware of it. There is judgments binding on the courts. No court can violate any of the judgments by the courts, because judgments all are only mentioning the climate. Focus is climate now, and this is what the Pakistan stance is. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Hassan. Can I now invite Justice Benjamin to share some reflections on environmental jurisprudence as it has grown in Brazil What issues have been central? Are new concerns becoming more frequent? Which jurisdictions are in conversation with each other? Is more judicial exchange across borders important for the collective goal of better governance of the climate crisis? Thank you.
I guess it's still good morning or good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. I feel very privileged to be in this group within the Pakistani pavilion, an event You cannot hear me?
We can hear you. I just want to continue to get happy.
Okay, all right. So Christina, I was just thanking our hosts and especially our very dear colleague, Justice Mansour Ali Shah. I know him for over 20 years. We have been friends and collaborating for over 20 years. And as president of the Global Judicial Institute on Environment, I'm very honored to have him as one of the board members of our institute. And there are other board members here as well. The question that was posed to me is about the Brazilian jurisprudence, but I think it would be more interesting if instead of speaking on specific cases of Brazil, and we have literally thousands of cases, all reported, all online, perhaps we could discuss what is in those cases in a broader context. And when judges meet, like we are here today, to discuss climate change, we are basically traveling. It's a journey between three concepts. The first concept is about climate change itself and climate. The second one is, of course, about law. And the third one is about justice. So, climate, law, justice. And where are we? We are one of, not the only one, but one of the main actors of this triangle. There are good news and not so good news about this triangle. We know that since ancient times, judges have been recognized as key players in the way societies address their issues. So we are not new. Second, one of the very first developments in what we call civilization was the development of laws. So law in itself is not something new. What is new for both judges, law, is the incorporation of climate and climate change. That's what's new. All of us, and it doesn't matter if it's in common law or civil law, one of the very first things people of my generation, we learn in first year law school is that there are things in life that don't belong to law. And they don't belong to law. Is it working? And they don't belong to law because they were either infinite or they were at the disposal of everyone. So appropriation was not possible. And the example for that was exactly the atmosphere. Another one, the oceans. And in the past 50 years, this whole paradigm has been entirely changed. And what was considered intangible, infinite, impossible of appropriation, direct appropriation, now it's the core of an international gathering of this size, we call it climate change. So we should not miss that, because law and we judges are very slow in incorporating new challenge in society. And here what we have is, in less than 50 years, we moved from a paradigm in which the climate as such, and climate change, we're not even talking about climate change, were outside of the legal regimes. And now they come not just to the periphery of legal regimes, but to the very center as an existential component of any legal regimes. The questions are many for us judges. And I'll touch, and I'll use one or two cases of our jurisprudence, but I'll touch on a couple of them. The first is that I think we should be frank among ourselves. There are two risks here. One risk, and we still have many colleagues that think like that, but we need to change their way of thinking, is that this is not a matter for judges. This is something that has to be dealt by the international community and especially by governments, by the executive branch. This is completely wrong. And now most countries of the world, in fact, have national laws, and some states, subnational legislations all over the different continents. The other risk is the opposite, is to think that judges can't solve alone, just with a judgment, the climate change challenge that we face. And I think this is equally wrong, and it is a threat to find the right solutions to what we need. The answer is in between. Judges are not outside of the picture, and judges do not make the only picture. We are an important actor, especially in countries with the rule of law, because we have the final word. And we have the final word in many things, and nowadays in climate as well. The other reflection that I would like to bring to you has to do with the way ourselves should be seen. The legitimacy of judges doesn't come from the fact that we speak sometimes beautifully, other times very boring. In meetings, in academia, we write books, we write interesting judgments. Our force, our legitimacy comes from credibility. That people trust us, that people see us as not biased on one side or on the other side. And we need to be very aware of that, because the moment we judges lose the trust of the people, we are losing ourselves, we are losing our competence to decide cases of that magnitude. Often I hear colleagues saying that, we in climate law we need activist judges. We don't, for a single reason. The activism is not with us, the activism is in the constitutions of our countries. The activism is in the good laws of our countries that have been passed in the last 15, 20 years. So the activist judges is in fact those that refuse to apply those laws. And those are the activist judges by omission. And this is probably the worst type of activist judge, because it refuses to apply the laws of the country, the laws that transform the legal paradigm of our countries. My final point is what we national judges have to do in respect to this. What are our functions? How can we deliver not just a judgment, a poetic judgment, but something that transforms reality and helps both the international community, our national communities, our nations, but especially the most vulnerable people? And there are many ways. We are developing new principles, and some of our colleagues mentioned here, at least one of them, the principle in dubio pro natura. In case of doubt, we judges are the good climate for people. But we also should be aware that in many parts of the world, we see two trends in opposite direction. We see a trend in the development of a robust climate change legislation and jurisprudence, and in the opposite directions, we see an erosion of the rule of law. And we cannot protect the climate, and we cannot really protect the most vulnerable people if we don't have the rule of law. And that's why one of the principles that we have developed and been using quite often in not just in climate litigation but environmental litigation in general is the principle of non-regression. We are always advancing. Civilization cannot backslide. Otherwise, the provisions that are in the Constitution would not make sense, because they point to a horizon in which human rights, human dignity, and the most vulnerable are well protected, not perfectly, but even if imperfectly, we are progressing all the time and never going back. In conclusion, I would like again, Mansour, to congratulate Pakistan and the Pakistani judiciary. We are very proud of you. It's one of the finest judiciaries in the world, and we know the judiciary is not made just of air. The judiciary is made of people, and people with strong character and strong beliefs. And I see all that in the Pakistani judiciary. And I am very honored to have you, the Pakistani family, my Pakistani family, working together with the global family. And I see here Professor Christina Foyt, the chair of the World Commission on Environmental Law, my dear Malindi from Globe International, the parliamentarians, the legislators, the ones that make the laws. This is the family, and I'm delighted to be part of this family. Many thanks.
Thank you, Justice Benjamin. Is it still crackling?
Try not to.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm so scared of this. Our last speaker is Justice Shah. Can I invite you to reflect on the future of jurisprudence in the climate sphere? What topics are growing in importance or will grow? Where are we headed? This COP is being called the Finance COP. So could I invite you to perhaps shed light in that direction too in your comments? And as you are the panel chair, I will also ask you to offer some concluding reflections on the panel at the end of your comments.
I think here because of the
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Let me just first say that Antonio has to probably get to another event, and Luke has to get to another event. Thank you for leaving me high and dry, but they have to go to another event. But I thank them very, personally for being here, and thank you so much for your contribution and being a family for the last 2 decades. I treasure that relationship very much, and thank you for coming to the Parks Pavilion for this talk. Thank you so much. I'll let you go so then I can just start off later on. And Sapna also wants to leave. That's how much they love me. You see, they're just leaving in the end. But thank you so much for being here at the pavilion. Thank you. इस्तार से होता है।
हाँ नहीं जनरली
इस्तार से
अभी ठीक हो गया इंशाल्लाह।
Let me start off Okay, could I, Antonio, there are some souvenirs for Antonio, Sapna and Luke. Can they be given first before I get to talk? Idhar de, is taraf le aaye, is taraf front pe le aaye. Why don't you come here and just receive it? I just want to show that this is, we're just sharing the football Pakistan makes for FIFA. So this is the football for you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. And that's the. Thank you, Sapna, for being here, and the gifts your way. Maybe this is right. It has a football with Pakistan.
It's the SDGs.
And you, thank you so much. You get to play football also. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah. Okay, so can I just, I've been doing a session right now. So let me just start off, let this get done, sorry. Okay, can I have your attention now? Thank you so much. Let me just, first of all, thank the government of Pakistan. I think this is one of the most robust and perhaps the most dynamic pavilions at the COP29 this year, even last year also, which gives so much importance to climate justice. And you see, Pakistan has organized 2 events bringing out their judges and their judiciary out to COP29 to talk about climate justice, which I don't think any country in COP29 has done so far. So I think a big hand for Pakistan for putting up such a wonderful show. You'll also get to say a few words now that we have you here. I'll be very grateful. Our young star, Justice Jawad, who's creating new inroads into climate justice, and you just heard about this 3-year-old child that has come to court, to his court, and he has really interfered in the matter. The matter is pending, and that sort of gives us hope that there is a lot of young breed coming up in climate justice within the judiciary of Pakistan and taking it further. So thank you so much. We also work very closely with Dr. Louis, who is the Assistant Secretary General of the Commonwealth, which also shows our diversity, how judiciary is trying to work on training or a number of other areas to understand the issue and take it further. My concern today would be, and I want to go to a totally new area, and I think it's high time that we start a new chapter. We've been at the business of climate justice for a while, and we've been attending to a number of areas, but I must underline that Pakistan, or the global south that I address today, has been taking the brunt of climate change, you see. Try to understand and please appreciate that we do not emit, or if there is any emission, that is negligible. What we come across is the effects of climate change, which leads to intense droughts, which leads to water scarcity, severe fires, rising sea levels, flooding, melting of polar ice, catastrophic storms and declining biodiversity, and you name it, and it is going on. Every year the intensity, it keeps on increasing, and we suffer at the hands of climate change. So what I want to highlight today is that while our jurisprudence on climate justice has done great work and we have settled some great principles on climate, we've been talking about climate justice being a human right, we've been talking about a rights-based court, we've settled those principles, we've talked about right to dignity and as a very important principle of climate justice, we've talked about implementing government policies and we've pushed government to go ahead and continue implementing their policies, and this is the Asghar Laghari case where we talked about pushing them towards climate justice. We've held corporations, and that's the global picture also, we've held corporations accountable under the Paris Agreement, and that is the jurisprudence all over the world. We've gone ahead and stopped projects which were not climate resilient and stopped them from proceeding further. That was the judicial review of executive actions. We've relied on polluters pays principle. We've relied on public trust doctrine. We've relied on intergenerational equity. We have talked about the intersection of climate justice or climate change with gender perspective. We've talked about intersections of child justice with climate justice or climate change. We've talked about rights of nature, recognizing nature as a legal entity, rivers or trees or waters as legal entities. We've talked about climate washing and we've addressed those issues. We've talked about, and currently that's going on, we're talking about the transboundary litigation, and ICJ for the first time sits on an advisory opinion about climate change. So this is the world that is before you, and this is what the world has done and the judges of the world has done so far. But I want to go to a totally new topic today and talk about the fact that countries from global south, when we talk about climate justice, it is actually climate finance. Climate justice is climate finance, and I say that climate finance is the new human right. Unless you have climate finance, there is no way we can do adaptation. There is no way you can attend to loss and damage, which are the critical areas. So while we go ahead and come up with earlier jurisprudence, the first phase of our jurisprudence, where we talk about climate justice and all these principles, we realize that climate finance is actually the lifeline that we need to address, because none of those principles that we talk about can be actualized or executed unless we have climate finance. So adaptation would make no sense. No directions that we give to implement policies which are adaptive in nature cannot be implemented if there's no finance. So climate finance is the new human right, to my mind, and that is what we need to start talking about, and we cannot leave that away. So, and within the climate finance domain in Pakistan or in all the global south countries, we have adaptation as one area, and the other area is loss and damage. The distinction would be, one you can attend to, the other is irreversible and you have to provide for it immediately because the story is over. Adaptation is a more continuous process which can go on a long-term basis, but loss and damage you need to attend now. So these are the two areas that we need to understand between adaptation, loss and damage. So we move on, and what do we do? See, that's the important part. But we must need to understand the challenges of the global south. They can't do it themselves. That's why climate finance is important. We can't do it ourselves. Why? We have economic constraints and poverty. We have weak institutional capacities. We have political instabilities and governance issues. We have vulnerabilities of the climate, as you know. We have huge technological gaps. We cannot come up with technology to deal with these issues. We have social inequality and justice issues in the country. We lack access to public awareness and education in the area. Not a lot of people understand what's happening to them. We have agricultural vulnerability and food security. We also have legal challenges as far as legal framework is concerned. So these are the constraints we're living through right now. So therefore, we need to understand that adaptation and resilience are cost intensive. That's important. We can't just say, courts can't keep on saying, please go ahead and adapt. We have come up with adaptive jurisprudence, do adaptation. Well, it's very easy to say, go ahead and do adaptation, bring projects. How do we do it? We need climate finance, and nothing is trickling down. The global funds are all there. Firstly, they're not adequate enough. Secondly, nothing is trickling down to our country in reality. So this is all nice talk and show that there is, these global funds are there, but nothing is actually trickling down. And that's the problem. So adaptation needs serious, the money that's required. The UN Environment Program estimates adaptation costs in developing countries could reach about 300 billion annually by 2030. So current funding gaps are there and we're not really attending to that. Then we need to understand that climate justice as a moral and a financial obligation of the global north. We need to start thinking of it as a climate debt. It's not a favor, it's not some courtesy here that they need to give us this money. It's actually a climate debt to my mind. And they'll have to think of this as a serious moral obligation on the north to provide funds to us, and that is important. So I would take this, the new climate justice or the new face of climate justice would be reparative justice. These are reparations. They have to give this money to us. So this is reparative justice that we need to think of. We need to think of it as a climate debt, and that's the future to my mind if we want to go further on this issue. Then if we move on and understand how could judges deal with this situation? What do we do with, how do we proceed further in this matter? But before I do that, let me also sort of make this clear that we need to, first of all, build this pressure on the north that they need to have this climate financing as an obligation and bring that to us as part of climate justice as a concept. We need to also think of private sector involvement, international private sector or local private sector contributions need to come in as some source of climate justice or climate finance. We need to also think of debt swaps and relief. Climate-linked debt relief could allow developing nations to redirect funds from debt repayment towards climate resilience. Mechanisms like debt for climate swaps offer an alternative by converting a portion of foreign debt into investment for climate projects. We need to think of innovative financial mechanisms. For example, green bonds or insurance schemes and climate risk financing tools are emerging options that developing countries might adopt to finance climate projects independently. These instruments, however, require international support and initial funding. Strengthening regional and global alliance. This is very important. Strengthening alliance between climate vulnerable countries, the V20 group, is very important. I think becomes more important now. Comprising vulnerable developing countries allows them to amplify their voices and demand for climate finance. They can present a united front on the global north, presenting to the global north, potentially gaining leverage in negotiation. And I think within V20, it is high time, and I met a member of the V20 earlier today, it's important that there is a judges coalition of V20. The judges of the V20 need to come together and think of ways of providing climate justice. And now the new face of climate justice in our countries is climate finance. There is nothing else to climate justice in our countries unless we understand how to go about climate finance. And the whole focus has to be climate finance for the judiciary in the next decade. That is, to me, the next decade of climate justice. So I think V20 needs to get their act together, and we need to have a coalition. I hope that the government sort of looks at that aspect also, and we can have that coalition going. So how do the courts now function in the next decade? I mean, we've laid down the principles already. That's fine. That's all nice, soft law. But what do we tangibly do to change the life of people who's suffering every year because things are getting worse and worse every year? So number one would be to interpreting climate finance as a human right. That's the first thing. Now this is the new human right. So climate debt and reparative justice is the new word that we need to think of. So courts can recognize climate finance as a fundamental human right, emphasizing its necessity for the survival and development of vulnerable communities. By establishing a clear judicial understanding that climate finance is tied to the right to life, health and sustainable environment, courts can push for stronger legal obligations from both domestic governments and international entities. Number two, mandating government accountability and transparency. This is very important. Whatever money comes, will it actually get to the people or not? That is also very important in the global south. So courts can require governments to develop transparent, robust mechanisms for securing, managing and dispersing climate funds. We would like to push the government to go ahead, get those funds internationally. What are they doing about it? Are they really reaching out and getting those funds from the world or not? Are they really coming up with innovative local domestic climate finance solutions or not? That's the focus of the courts for future. We're going to push the government to do these things because that's the constitutional courts can do that. Moving on, then we'll need to think of ensuring equity in climate finance distribution. Whenever it sort of comes in, how do we distribute, and the courts monitor their distribution, and how do the money gets allocated to the exact area where it's required. Strengthening national finance, climate finance infrastructure. There's a lot of confusion right now. How do we apply? How does the money get to us? Who assesses the damage? Who assesses adaptation projects? There's a whole gray area. We don't see a huge framework, a legal framework looking at this area, and I think the country has to do it, and internationally also we need to understand what's the financial infrastructure. I mean, I don't know if I keep looking, how do I go approach, the global funds, how does it work, how does your application go through, what are the parameters, what's the expertise required, what's the science behind it, how do we go about it. Number of areas which are not clear right now need to be understood. So we also want to facilitate strategic litigation against non-dispersal by global funds. So if global funds are not being disbursed the way we want them, there has to be a negotiation. We need to understand that the global judges need to get together and see if we can do something to build pressure and how these funds ought to really translate and come to Pakistan or to the global south for that matter. And also enhancing international accountability. Courts in global south, either independently or through networks like the UN Human Rights Council or regional bodies, can pressure global funds and developed countries to fulfill their climate finance obligations. That's another structure that we need to think of in future. And we need to also think of engaging in judicial diplomacy, like I talked about V20, but the judges of the world need to again get together and understand this climate diplomacy that we need to enter into. How do we go about stressing this climate finance area and getting more money for global south? So the next thing which is important is that the future of litigation, as I see it, would be regarding climate science. It will all be about how the courts are going to decide what damages to be paid, how to apportion these damages, how do we assess the damage itself, what if the assessment done by the Global Fund is not accurate enough, do these matters come to domestic courts, will they go to some other court? We need to understand climate science, and our judges need to understand climate science if we want to understand climate finance. And that is an area untouched, by the way. Our trial courts have no clue. Our constitutional judges, we right here, we need to be grappling with and trying to understand what climate science is, but that's the future. And in the end, I think there has to be a policeman. We have to police these global funds, and an international court is a necessity. And I think Christina Voigt is here. There has to be an international court. There is no way we can police this entire framework if there is no international court to look at that. ICJ is currently looking at the advisory opinion on climate issues, but there has to be some sort of an extension of that leading to a more regulatory, global adjudicatory forum which sort of looks into all this area. So I thank you all. With that I end, and I thank you all, and I thank my friends from all over the world who've been here. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Can Christina Voigt join us, please, here and share some reflections for the next few minutes? We do have some panel time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Justice Shah, thank you for your very kind words, but also thank you for your leadership on pointing out the most important role that law lawyers and judges play in the transition to a world that is aligned with 1.5 degrees, but which will also have to address the losses and damages that happen. As you said, in that transition to a 1.5 aligned world, the Paris Agreement is the bedrock that guides us. The goals of the Paris Agreement is what we take as our inspiration in our legal work on temperature increases, on finance, on adaptation. And in this context, I would like to express my gratitude to the government of Pakistan because, as you may know, the Paris Agreement has a compliance committee, and I'm so privileged to be the co-chair of the compliance committee together with a wonderful diplomat of Pakistan, Mr. Hasib Gohar. He is a diplomat at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And if you allow me, let me please point out that we have a side event in about 15 minutes at the United Nations Climate Change Pavilion over there, where we will showcase the Paris Agreement Compliance Committee. We will be joined by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Executive Secretary, Mr. Simon Steele, as well as by the Ambassador of Pakistan, Mr. Nabil Shah, as well as Hasib Gohar and myself. So you're very welcome to join us in about 15 minutes. But with that, thank you so much for
Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to all the attendees. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Oh, there's this, we thought we just...
Okay. Just
They love it. This is Pakistan makes it all the way. Thank you. Pakistan.
Are you seeing the President He is the star of Pakistan, first woman Supreme Court judge of Pakistan, very famous.
Okay, sir.
Excellent speech.
एरिया बड़ा मुश्किल है लेकिन आपकी मदद के बगैर नहीं होगा
है उनको देना है हमारी दो Don't go away.